What Evan Hartley didn't know, the night he sat across from me at my dining room table and told me my daughter wasn't worth marrying unless I paid for the privilege, was that the company holding his family's commercial lease, the one that kept their 3 hardware stores running, was mine. He thought he was having dinner with a retired school teacher. I let him think that. My name is Gerald. No, wait, I've been Gerald my whole life and people always assumed that meant something soft, mild-mannered, forgettable. I'm 63 years old. I drive a 2014 Civic. I wear the same brand of flannel shirt I've been buying since 1994, and I volunteer at the curling club on Tuesday nights. I look exactly like what people expect when they hear retired high school history teacher from Sudbury. That's not an accident. That's a choice I made a long time ago, and it has served me very well. My daughter, I'll call her my girl, because that's how I think of her. Even now that she's 31, she called me on an Earth Day in February. It was -22 outside. I was making soup. Dad, she said, can you come down this weekend? Evan wants to have dinner. He says he has something to discuss. I asked if everything was okay. I think so, she said, but she didn't sound sure. My girl had been with Evan Hartley for 2 years by then. I'd met him 4 or 5 times. He was the kind of man who shook your hand too firmly and then watched your face to see if you'd noticed. His family ran a small chain of hardware stores in the Barry area, Hartley's Home and Hardware, 3 locations, been around since his grandfather's time. He liked to mention that. He mentioned it the way some people mention they went to a good university. Like it was a credential. He'd grown up comfortable. Not wealthy, not by any real measure, but comfortable in the way that makes some people believe comfort is their birthright rather than their circumstance. His mother, Vivienne, I'll call her that, she had a particular way of looking at people. Not unkind exactly. More like she was filing you away. Categorizing. Deciding what you were worth before you'd finished your sentence. The first time I met her at a restaurant in Barry, she'd asked me what I did. I told her I was retired. She asked from what? I said teaching. She nodded the way people nod when they're being polite but have already moved on internally. That was fine. I didn't need her to be impressed. I've never needed that. My wife, my girl's mother, she passed 11 years ago. Ovarian cancer. She was 51 years old, and she spent the last 6 months of her life making sure our daughter knew she was loved. I think about that a lot. About what it means to love someone in a way that outlasts you. My wife figured that out. I'm still learning. After she died, I didn't stop working for a while. I kept teaching, kept coaching the junior curling team, kept doing what I'd always done. But I also took a harder look at the things I'd been quietly building on the side for 20 years. My wife always called it my hobby. Buying a small property here, a commercial unit there, reinvesting the rental income, being very patient and very boring about the whole enterprise. She used to joke that I'd be the richest man at the funeral home someday. I have 9 commercial properties in Ontario, 4 in Sudbury, 2 in Barrie, 1 in North Bay, 2 in a mixed-use development outside Collingwood that I'm particularly fond of. I also hold partial stakes in a few private equity arrangements that a former student of mine, a very sharp young man who runs a mid-size fund out of Toronto, manages on my behalf. I don't talk about this. I don't think it's anyone's business. My accountant knows. My lawyer knows. My daughter mostly knows, though not every detail, because I never wanted her to feel like she was living under the shadow of a number. The Hartley family's commercial lease for their Barrie South location, 2nd floor retail in a building I purchased in 2019. Property management company handles the day-to-day. The name on the holding company is 3 layers removed from my name. There's no reason anyone would connect it to a retired school teacher from Sudbury who drives a 2014 Civic. I drove down on Saturday, -18. Clear sky, the kind of cold that makes everything look brittle and precise. Evan had made dinner, I'll give him that. Roast chicken, roasted potatoes, a green salad. His mother was there, that part I hadn't expected. We ate. We talked about the weather, because this is Canada, and that is what we do. We talked about the Leafs, because this is Ontario, and that is also what we do. We talked about how the hardware business was holding up against the big box stores. Evan said they were doing fine. His mother said they were more than fine. She said Hartley's was an institution. I said that was wonderful. After dinner, while my girl was in the kitchen making tea, Evan leaned forward with his elbows on the table and his hands loosely folded, the way men do when they're about to say something they've rehearsed. He said he and my daughter had been talking about the future. I said that was good to hear. He said they were thinking about getting married. I said I was happy for them. He said, and I remember his exact because I've turned them over in my mind many times since. Before we move forward, though, I think we need to have a frank conversation about family contributions. I waited. A wedding isn't cheap, he said, and we have certain expectations in terms of what the event should look like. My family has a reputation to maintain. Hartley's has been part of this community for 3 generations. The wedding needs to reflect that. His mother was nodding slightly the way she did. We're thinking the venue, the catering, the photography. We're looking at somewhere around $120,000, all in. It's a big number, but it's a statement. My family will cover $70,000. We're asking your side to contribute $50,000. I looked at him for a moment. Then I looked at his mother. Then I looked back at him. $50,000, I said. That's a reasonable split, he said, given the circumstances. I asked what circumstances he meant. He glanced at his mother. She looked at the tablecloth. Well, he said, you're retired. You're on a fixed income, presumably. We understand that. But this is about family, right? About commitment. And we think it's reasonable to expect both families to have skin in the game. There it was. He didn't say, you're a retired teacher and you probably can't afford this. He was too careful for that. But that's what he meant. The subtext was plain enough. He was telling me I was lesser, that my side of the family was the lesser side, that $50,000 was a test, and he expected me to fail it, and failing it would mean something. My girl came back in with the tea tray. She set it down and looked at me. She'd been crying, I could tell just around the eyes. She'd heard some of this before, I realized. This conversation wasn't new to her. She'd been living with it. I looked at my daughter and I made a decision. I smiled. Let me think about that, I said. Evan looked satisfied. His mother looked satisfied. My daughter looked at me with an expression I couldn't entirely read, part apology, part fear, part something else that took me a while to name. Shame. She was ashamed, not of me, of this, of what was happening at this table. I drove home that night thinking about my wife, about what she would have said. She was warmer than me, more immediate in her reactions, quicker to name what she was feeling. She would have said something that night, something measured but unmistakably clear. I tend to be slower. I tend to let things settle before I act. I called my lawyer on Monday morning. His name is not important. He's been my lawyer for 18 years and he's very good. I asked him to pull up the file on the Barry South commercial property. He did. I asked him who was the current tenant in Unit 2B. He told me, Hartley's Home and Hardware, commercial lease, renewed 14 months ago, 5-year term. I asked him to send me the full lease agreement. Then I called the property manager. Then I called my accountant. I also called my daughter. She picked up on the second ring. I asked her how she was doing, and she was quiet for a moment. And then she said, Dad, I don't know what to do. I asked her if she loved Evan. She said she thought so. I asked her if she felt respected by him. Longer pause this time. He's different at home, she said. When it's just us, he's different. I told her I understood. I told her I wasn't going to tell her what to do. I told her I loved her and I was going to handle things my way, and I asked her to trust me. She said, Dad, please don't do anything that makes everything worse. I told her I was going to make things clearer. That's different from worse. I didn't call Evan. I didn't reach out to his mother. I let 2 weeks go by. I let the silence sit. During those 2 weeks, I looked into the Hartley family's financial situation more carefully. Not intrusively. I didn't do anything I wasn't entitled to do, but carefully. What I found was instructive. The 3 hardware stores were, as Evan had said, doing fine. But fine was doing some heavy lifting in that sentence. The Barry South location, the one in the building I owned, was carrying significant inventory debt. They'd expanded the footprint of the store 18 months ago, taken on more square footage, hired additional staff. The lease renewal had gone up 12%. Their margins were thinner than they'd been. Their Barry North location was the profitable one. The Collingwood store was borderline. Barry South was the question mark. None of this was secret information. Some of it was in public filings. Some of it was available to any landlord who looked carefully at a tenant's payment history and asked the right questions. 3 weeks after the dinner, Evan called me. He was warm on the phone, friendly. He asked how I was. asked about the drive home that night, asked about Sudbury. Then he asked if I'd given more thought to the conversation we'd had. I said I had. He asked where I was landing. I said I'd like to meet in person, if that was all right. I said I had some questions about the wedding plans, and I thought it would be better to talk face to face. He agreed. We set a date. His family home in Barry the following Saturday. I asked if his parents would be there. He said yes, his mother certainly would. His father had passed a few years back, heart attack. I said I was sorry to hear that, and I meant it. That Saturday, I wore the same flannel shirt. I drove the Civic. I brought a box of butter tarts from the bakery in Sudbury that my wife used to love, because I'm from Northern Ontario, and that's what you bring. Evan's mother greeted me at the door with a smile that was perfectly calibrated, warm enough to be polite, cool enough to be clear. She offered me coffee. I accepted. We sat in their living room. Nice house, well-maintained, Victorian-era bones, renovated maybe 15 years ago. There were framed photos of the hardware stores on the wall. The original location, a black and white photo from the 50s. Grandfather Hartley in an apron. I respected that, genuinely. There's something honest about a family business. Evan sat across from me, his mother beside him, slightly back, in the way that told me she'd positioned herself as support rather than participant. A show of deference that wasn't quite deference. I thanked them for having me. I said I'd been thinking carefully about the wedding conversation. Evan leaned forward, that same posture, elbows, folded hands. I said, before I respond to your proposal, I'd like to understand something. When you set that number, 50,000, what was the reasoning behind it? He said it was a proportional contribution, a 50-30 split between the families. I said, and that proportion was based on what, exactly? What did you assume about my financial situation? He said it wasn't about assumptions, it was about fairness. I said, Evan, I've been a high school teacher for 31 years, you know that. You also know I'm retired. When you made that calculation, you were making an assumption that I want to name out loud. You assumed that because I'm a retired teacher, I'm on a fixed income, I'm limited, and $50,000 is a stretch. You assumed that asking for 50 would put me in a position of having to choose between my daughter's happiness and my financial security. Am I wrong? He started to say something. I kept going. Here's what I'd like to tell you. I have spent 40 years building something, quietly, without talking about it, because I was taught that what you build matters more than what you say. I have 9 commercial properties in Ontario. I have investment holdings that my accountant manages. I am not wealthy by the standards of Bay Street, but I am not a retired school teacher on a pension who needs to scrape together $50,000 to prove his love for his daughter. The room was very quiet. One of those properties, I said, is in Barry. It's a commercial building on Essa Road. The second-floor unit is currently leased to a retail tenant. That lease is held through a property management company called Northgate Commercial Group. Evan's expression shifted, very slightly, like something behind his eyes moved. Hartley's Home and Hardware, I said, has been a tenant in that building for 6 years. His mother made a sound, not a word, just a sound. Your Barry South lease, I said, was renewed 14 months ago, 5-year term. The renewal included a 12% rate increase which you accepted. The lease is in good standing. I have no intention of altering that. I paused. I let that settle. But I want you to understand something, Evan, and I want you to understand it clearly. When you sat across from my dining room table and told me that $50,000 was a reasonable expectation, when you implied that my daughter was marrying down, that your family's reputation required a certain kind of wedding that mine needed to subsidize, you made a mistake. Not a financial mistake, a mistake about who people are. Evan had gone very still. You looked at a man in a flannel shirt who drives an old Civic and brings butter tarts to dinner, and you decided you already knew what he was worth. That's your right. People make that judgment all the time. But I want you to understand that the judgment was wrong. And more importantly, it was mean. Mean in a way that my daughter felt. Mean in a way that my daughter has been feeling for some time, I suspect. I looked at his mother then. She was looking at her hands. I'm not here to threaten you, I said. I'm not going to do anything to your lease. The business is the business. That's separate. What I'm telling you is personal. What I'm telling you is that I know what you thought of me, and I know what you thought of my daughter by extension, and I need you to sit with that. I stood up. I thanked them for the coffee. I picked up my coat. At the door, I turned around. My daughter is the best thing I have ever done, I said. She is kind, and she is sharp, and she has her mother's eyes and her mother's laugh. And I have spent 31 years teaching, because I believe that what you teach lasts longer than you do. She learned how to move through the world with her head up. She learned that from her mother and from me, and she did not learn it so that she could spend her life with someone who makes her feel small. I left. I drove to a coffee shop 2 blocks away, and I sat there for 40 minutes with a medium dark roast, and I looked out the window at the frozen parking lot, and I felt about 8 different things at once, the way you do when you've said something true that cost you something. My girl called me that evening. She said, "Dad, Evan called me." I waited. "He told me what happened," she said. Her voice was careful, the way it gets when she's feeling something she's not ready to name yet. I told her I was sorry if I'd overstepped. I told her I meant what I said, all of it, but I understood if it complicated things for her. She was quiet for a long moment. "He said," she started, then stopped. He was upset. "He said you blindsided him. He said you were trying to intimidate his family." I asked her what she thought. Another pause. "I think," she said slowly, "that no one has ever stood up for me like that, in front of them, the way you did." I didn't say anything. I didn't trust my voice right then. "I've been trying to manage Evan for 2 years," she said. "Trying to manage how he talks about you. Trying to make him understand why you're not. Why it's not about the money, the stuff you have. Why that's not the point." And he never got it. He kept saying you were different from his family. Like different was the problem. I told her different wasn't the problem. It was never the problem. She said, "I know that, Dad." And then she said, "I'm not going to marry him." I had not expected to cry in a coffee shop parking lot at 6:15 on a Saturday in February. But here we are. What happened after that was quieter than you might expect. My daughter didn't make a dramatic announcement. She didn't have a confrontation scene. She called Evan the following day and told him she needed time to think. And 3 days after that, she told him she'd been thinking about it for longer than she'd admitted to herself, and that she didn't think they were right for each other in the ways that mattered. He was hurt. He was angry for a while. His mother sent my daughter a text that I will not describe in detail except to say it was not generous. My daughter forwarded it to me with a single line. "I'm okay, Dad. That was enough. We spent Easter together that year, just the 2 of us, at my house in Sudbury. She helped me clear the back garden. We made my wife's recipe for butter chicken. She learned it from her mother, and I learned it by watching them together, neither of us quite getting it right on our own, both of us getting it mostly right together. We ate at the kitchen table with the window open, because it was finally warm enough to have the window open, and we talked about her mother, and we talked about the future, and we talked about what she wanted from it. She said she wanted to build something that was hers, not someone else's idea of what she should be, something she chose. I told her that sounded exactly right. I've thought since then about what I actually did in that room. Whether I was right, whether I was too calculated, whether I went there to have a conversation or to demonstrate something, and whether those things can be the same act without one corrupting the other. I think about my wife a lot when I'm thinking about that. She was a more instinctive person than I am. She acted from the gut, and she was almost always right in a way that I couldn't have predicted from the outside. She would have known in 30 seconds what I took 2 weeks to understand. But she also would have done what I did, I think. Differently, maybe. Warmer, maybe. But she would have gone back into that room. She used to say, and I can hear her saying it, I can hear her exact voice, "You don't let people decide what you're worth. You decide what you're worth, and then you act like it's already been settled." I taught history for 31 years because I believed in it. Because I believed that what people did in the past mattered to what people could do in the future. Because I believed that where you came from was part of what you were, but not all of what you were, and that the distance between those two things was where a person lived their life. Evan Hartley assumed he knew where I lived. He assumed I lived near the beginning of that distance. He was wrong. My daughter lives near the good part, the part her mother built and I tried to build, and she finished building herself. She moved to a new apartment in Ottawa last August. She started a job with a Crown corporation, environmental policy, something she'd been working toward for 3 years. She calls me on Sundays. Sometimes we talk for 20 minutes, and sometimes we talk for 2 hours, and I never know which it's going to be, and I love that about her. She came to curling club in December, her first time, and she was terrible at it, in the specific, joyful way that she's always been terrible at new physical things. Fully committed and completely wrong. And the Tuesday night regulars loved her immediately. She threw a rock straight into the side wall, ricocheted off 2 other stones, and somehow it ended up exactly where she needed it to be. I told her that was the most accurate metaphor I'd ever witnessed in real life. She told me to be quiet and sweep. I swept. We lost by 4 ends and I didn't care at all.